I was signing the paperwork for our biggest client yet when my brother walks through the front door of my office like he owned the place. He didn't knock. He never knocked. He just pushed the glass door open, looked around at the exposed brick walls and the floor-to-ceiling windows and the framed press features, and nodded slowly, the way someone nods when they're trying to look unimpressed but can't quite pull it off. I set my pen down. My business partner Laurel was sitting across from me. She looked at him, then looked at me. I told him I was in the middle of something. He said it wouldn't take long. It took 4 months to untangle everything that started in that room. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Nadia. I'm 31 years old. I own a boutique digital marketing and brand strategy agency in Austin, Texas. We have 11 full-time employees, a waiting list of clients, and last year we crossed 2 million in revenue for the first time. I built it from nothing, literally nothing. I started it at 26 on a folding table in my apartment with a secondhand laptop and a logo I designed myself at midnight because I couldn't afford to outsource it. My family thought it was a phase. My mother called it Nadia's little internet thing. My brother, whose name is Colt, though I've thought of him more like dead weight for most of my adult life, told me I should go back to school and get a real degree instead of chasing likes online. My father just nodded whenever they said these things, which I eventually understood was the same as agreeing. I did not say any of this to make them look bad. I say it because context matters. They weren't cruel in the obvious way. They were just consistently, exhaustingly dismissive. And after a while, dismissal has the same effect as a door slamming in your face, except there's no loud noise to point to. No moment you can say definitively, that is when it broke. The break, for me, came when I was 27. I had just landed my first real anchor client, a mid-size e-commerce brand based in Dallas. It was a 6-month retainer, more money than I had ever invoiced in my life. I drove home to San Antonio to tell my family in person because I genuinely thought that this would be the thing that changed how they looked at me. My mother asked if I had health insurance. My brother said the brand sounded like something that would be out of business in 2 years. My father asked if I had eaten. I sat at that dinner table for 45 more minutes, ate my food, said goodbye, and drove back to Austin. I didn't cry until I hit the highway. And somewhere around the Buddha exit, I made a decision that I didn't even put into words for a long time. I was going to stop needing their approval. Not because I stopped loving them, but because waiting for something that wasn't coming was slowly making me someone I didn't recognize. I didn't stop returning calls. I showed up for Christmas and birthdays, but I stopped telling them things that mattered to me. I stopped asking their opinion. I stopped hopping. For 3 years, that was just the arrangement. Then Colt lost his job. He had been in sales, commercial real estate, the kind of job that sounds impressive at a family dinner but doesn't actually require anything resembling expertise. He'd been at the same company for 4 years, which I later found out meant he'd survived 3 rounds of cuts by some miracle of seniority. The 4th round got him. He was out of work for 8 months. I knew this because my mother told me during a Sunday call, in the same tone she used to discuss weather or neighbor gossip. She didn't ask me for anything. She just mentioned it. I said I was sorry to hear that. 3 weeks later, she called again and mentioned that Colt had always been interested in marketing. I said, She said, he has a real eye for branding. I said, that's interesting. She said, have you thought about expanding your team? I said I had some positions I was looking to fill, yes. She said, well, I let the silence sit there. She said, I'm just saying it might be nice to keep it in the family. I told her I'd keep it in mind. I did not keep it in mind. I hired a woman named Priscilla 2 weeks later who had 6 years of experience and a portfolio that made my own early work look embarrassing by comparison. Colt never mentioned the conversation to me directly. I thought the whole thing had passed. It had not passed. What Colt had been doing during those 8 months, I found out later, was telling people he was in the process of transitioning into the digital marketing space. He told this to his friends. He told it to my parents. He apparently told it to a woman he was dating, who told it to her brother, who worked in finance and took it at face value. He had no portfolio. He had no clients. He had a Facebook page he'd made for a neighbor's dog grooming business as a favor, which he described to people as brand consulting work. When he walked into my office that afternoon, I had been in business for 5 years. I had a team. I had a lease on a real space. I had a media feature in a regional business journal that my mother had somehow never found time to read. He sat down across from me without being invited to sit. He said, "I've been thinking." I waited. He said he wanted to come on as a partner. I looked at him for a moment. I asked what he meant by partner. He said, and I want to be precise here because the exact words matter. He said he wanted to come in as a co-owner. Equal stake. He would handle business development and client relationships. I would handle the operations side, the creative work, the actual running of the company. I asked him what experience he had in digital marketing. He said experience was overrated. He said what mattered was relationships, and he knew people. I asked, what people? He named 3 people. One was our cousin. One was a former colleague who had left commercial real estate to open a barbecue restaurant. The third was someone he described as a guy from the gym. I told him I would think about it. He seemed to take this as genuine encouragement. He nodded, looked around the office again with that same slow nod and said, "It's a good space, Nadia. You've done well for yourself." He said it the way someone says not bad when they expected worse. After he left, Laurel looked at me and said, "Please tell me you're not actually thinking about it." I said, "Of course not." I said it calmly, but I won't pretend there wasn't something sitting in my chest the rest of that afternoon. Some old, tired ache that I thought I had driven past on the highway years ago. I said no 2 days later. I called him directly, kept it short, told him I wasn't in a position to bring on a partner and that the business model didn't support that kind of structural change right now. He was quiet for a second. Then he said, "So that's how it is." I said I didn't know what he meant by that. He said, "Mom always said you'd do this." I said, "Do what?" He didn't answer. He just said he'd thought as my brother I'd at least give him a real conversation about it. Then he hung up. My mother called the next morning. She said she had heard I'd refused to even consider giving my brother a chance. She said she was disappointed but not surprised. She said, "You've always thought you were too good for this family." I told her that wasn't true. She said, "Actions speak louder." Then my father called. He's a man of very few words, my father, so the fact that he called at all felt significant. He said, "Colt needs something right now. I hope you'll reconsider." I said I understood, but no. He said, "All right then." He hung up. For about 2 weeks, nothing happened. No calls, no messages. I thought naively that they had accepted it and moved on. Then the reviews started. My agency has a Google business profile, a Yelp page, a Clutch listing, the standard stuff for a service business. I checked them regularly out of habit. On a Thursday morning, in what was otherwise a completely normal week, I opened my dashboard and saw that we had received 7 new reviews overnight. 6 of them were 1 star. The language was odd, too formal in some places, too vague in others. Things like unprofessional communication and missed deliverables. Would not recommend for serious brands. Overpromises and underdelivers. None of the names matched any client I recognized, past or present. I flagged them for removal as fake reviews. The platforms have processes for this. It takes time. More came the next day, and the day after that. 14 total in 4 days. I had spent 5 years building a 4.7-star average across platforms. By the end of that week, we were sitting at 3.9, which doesn't sound catastrophic until you understand that in this industry, clients Google you before they ever reply to a proposal. A dip like that is visible. It raises questions. I got an email from a prospective client, a regional retail chain we'd been in conversations with for 6 weeks, saying they wanted to pause discussions until they had a better sense of some of the recent feedback they'd come across. I sat with that email for a long time. I wasn't panicking. That's the thing I want to be clear about. I was angry, yes. I was exhausted, yes. But somewhere in the back of my mind, very quietly, something had already started moving. I had known when I said no to Colt that there was a chance this wouldn't end cleanly. I didn't know it would go this far, but I had been running a business long enough to understand that you don't wait until a problem is already on fire to buy a fire extinguisher. 3 months before any of this happened, I had upgraded our legal counsel. We were growing fast, and I wanted proper contracts, proper protection. My attorney, A woman I'll call by her first name, Rosalind, because she prefers to stay out of anything public, had mentioned almost as an aside that if we ever suspected coordinated bad faith review activity, there were steps we could take and documentation we should start building immediately. I had started building it the day the first fake review appeared. By the time we hit 14 reviews, I had IP address logs from the review platforms, timestamps, pattern analysis showing that the accounts posting them had all been created within the same 72-hour window. And a third-party digital forensics consultant Rosalind had referred me to who had already traced 3 of the accounts to a device registered in San Antonio. I also had something else. 2 months before Colt came to my office, a mutual contact had reached out, someone who knew both of us peripherally, a woman named Delphine who had worked with my brother briefly in his real estate days. She'd heard he was getting into marketing and wanted to let me know he'd been telling people he was already in talks with my agency about a partnership. She thought I should know in case it came up professionally. I had thanked her and saved that message. When I forwarded everything to Rosalind, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "This is actually very clean. We have a strong case." She sent a cease and desist to Colt's personal address and a separate letter to my parents' address noting that any continued interference with my business operations could result in civil action for tortious interference and defamation. The review stopped within 24 hours. I heard nothing from any of them for 11 days. Then my mother called. She didn't lead with an apology. She never does. She led with, "I think this has gotten out of hand, and I think we should all sit down together like adults." I said I was open to that. She seemed surprised I agreed. She took a breath and said, "I think Holt made some mistakes, but his heart was in the right place. He looks at what you've built and he wants to be part of something. You can understand that." I said I could understand wanting to be part of something. What I couldn't get past was the decision to try to dismantle the thing I'd built when I said no. She was quiet. I said, "I've received legal advice not to discuss the specifics, but I want to say something to you directly and I want you to hear it." She said, "Okay." I said, "You called my company my little internet thing for years. You never asked how it was going. You never read the press piece. You never asked to see the office. And when I finally had something real, something with employees and clients and actual numbers, the response was to ask me to hand part of it to someone with no experience because he's family. And when I said no, the response was to try to burn it down." She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said, "I didn't know about the reviews." I said, "Mom." She said, "I didn't. I promise you, I didn't know." I believed her, actually. I believed that she hadn't known the specifics. But I also knew that when Colt had come up with the idea, the environment that allowed it, the years of not taking my work seriously, the ease with which they'd all decided I owed him something, that environment wasn't something he'd invented alone. I told her I needed some time. She said, "How much time?" I said I didn't know. Colt never called. Not then, not since. I don't know if that's pride or shame or both. I don't spend much time thinking about it anymore. My father sent a text 3 weeks after everything settled. Just 3 lines. He said he'd heard what happened. He said he wanted me to know he thought Colt had been wrong. He said, "I'm sorry I wasn't paying closer attention." I read it 4 times. I didn't cry, but I did sit with it for a while. I wrote back, "Thank you for saying that. I meant it." The retail client came back. I sent them a brief, factual account of what had occurred. Nothing inflammatory, just the timeline, along with documentation that the reviews had been flagged and removed. They called me the next week and said they wanted to move forward. We signed the contract on a Tuesday afternoon. Laurel opened a bottle of something sparkling she'd been keeping in the small fridge under her desk. She poured 2 glasses and handed one to me and said, "You know what I keep thinking?" I said, "What?" She said, "You never looked scared." Not once, the whole time. I thought about that. I said, "I was scared." She said, "I know. That's what I mean. I still talk to my mother, less than before, which maybe doesn't sound like progress, but for us, it actually is. Because the calls we do have are honest in a way they never were when I was performing closeness, I didn't feel. She asks about the business now. Real questions, not deflections. Last month, she asked me to explain what a brand strategy retainer actually involves. I walked her through it. She listened. It's not the relationship I would have written if I'd been given a choice, but I stopped grieving the version I imagined a long time ago. What I have instead is this: a company I built with my own hands, a team I'm proud of, a legal file I hope I never have to open again, and a very clear understanding of what I owe people and what I don't. Blood isn't a business plan. It isn't a resume. It isn't a reason to hand someone the thing you built, and it isn't a reason to stay quiet when they try to take it from you. I learned that, at 27, somewhere on the highway between San Antonio and Austin, in the dark, with the radio off. It just took a few more years to prove I'd meant it. I've thought a lot about why Colt did what he did. Not to excuse it, there's no version of a coordinated fake review campaign that gets excused, but because I think understanding it matters more than just being angry about it. He watched me build something real, from nothing, over 5 years. And instead of that being a source of pride, or even neutral indifference, it became a source of pressure he couldn't manage. The gap between where he was and where I was didn't motivate him. It cornered him. And when I said no, calmly, directly, without drama, that corner got smaller and he swung. That's what happens when someone has spent their whole life being told they deserve things they haven't earned. The expectation calcifies. It stops feeling like entitlement and starts feeling like justice. He genuinely believed, I think, that I owed him something. That family was a ledger, and because he was struggling and I wasn't, the balance was off and needed correcting. But a ledger only works if both people have been keeping the same books. I hadn't been keeping that ledger. I'd been keeping a different one. One that tracked work, decisions, sacrifice, late nights, clients lost and clients won. There was no column in my ledger for "a brother needs a win." And the moment I made that clear, everything fell apart on his end. What I keep coming back to is the role of honesty, not the aggressive kind, not the kind that performs itself in big confrontations, but the quiet, daily kind. The kind where you look at what you actually have, what you actually know, what you've actually done, and you let that be the measure. Colt never did that. He inflated the Facebook page for the dog grooming business into brand consulting work. He turned 8 months of unemployment into a transition. He called walking into my office without an appointment a business conversation. None of those things are evil, but they accumulate. Small dishonesty about your own abilities compounds, and eventually you believe the inflated version, and eventually the inflated version goes and sits across from someone who has the receipts, and the whole thing collapses in an afternoon. Laurel said I never looked scared. I was scared. But there's a difference between fear and disorder, and I think the thing that kept me steady through all of it, the fake reviews, the calls from my parents, the retail client pulling back, was that I had done the honest work for 5 years. I knew what the company was. I knew what I had built and what I hadn't. I wasn't performing confidence. I just had no reason to lie about the foundation because I had laid it myself, one real decision at a time. That's the thing about building something with integrity. When people try to undermine it, they're working against the truth. And the truth, if you've actually been tending to it, is sturdier than a cluster of fake reviews and a cease and desist. It holds. My father's 3-line text stays with me, not because it fixed anything. It didn't, not really, but because it was honest. Plain, late, imperfect, honest. And from a man who spent years nodding along to things he should have questioned, it was something. You take the honesty where it shows up, even when it arrives years behind schedule. I didn't build this company to prove anything to my family. I want to be clear about that because I know how these stories can sound. I built it because I had something to offer and I was willing to do the work. The fact that it eventually became the proof, that was just cause and effect doing what cause and effect does. You don't get to choose whether the results show up. You only get to choose whether the work was real. I chose real, every time. And when everything was on the line, that was enough.